Welcome to another episode of the Miko Peled podcast. We are happy to be back on the podcast and putting out some original content. So for those who have been following Miko lately, we have been really busy with his new webinar series, which has been coming out monthly, actually sometimes twice a month. And basically the short version with this webinar series is that Miko hosts a panel to discuss a different topic pertaining to Palestinian justice, Israel, and a lot of other intersecting issues. So I end up taking the audio from that webinar and turning them into podcasts for this audience. So that's what you've seen in your podcast feed for the last, month or couple months or so. But it also helps because if you've missed one of those events, you can tune into the discussion via the podcast. But we also have the videos that you can watch, as well as citations and resources from each of the panelists available at mikopeled.com. So whichever one you prefer, the audio version, the video version, it's all either on mikopeled.com or via this podcast. We got you covered all the way. So with that said, today is back to our old style of doing things, where Miko, sits down with somebody that he admires and who is putting in the work for Palestine. And today's guest is Susan Abulhawa. Susan Abulhawa was born to refugees of the Six-Day War in 1967, when her family's land was seized and Israel captured what remained of Palestine, including Jerusalem. She moved to the States as a teenager, graduated in biomedical science, and established a career in medical science. In July 2001, Susan founded Playgrounds for Palestine, a children's organization dedicated to upholding the right to play for Palestinian children. Her books include Mornings in Jenin, a book of poetry titled My Voice Sought the Wind, The Blue Between Sky and Water, and her much-anticipated upcoming work, Against the Loveless World, which we have included links to in the description. So there's both an Amazon and a non-Amazon option for purchasing. So please do yourself a favor and pre-order Against the Loveless World if you're a fan of Susan's work, or even if you're new to her work. Susan is also a signatory to and active participant in the BDS Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign, which calls for an economic and cultural boycott of Israel. So in this interview, the two of them discuss Susan's latest book. They discuss the inescapable politicization of Palestinian art. They discuss the cultural boycott of Israel in practice, and a lot more. So now on to the conversation between Miko Peled and Susan Abulhawa.
All right, so Susan Abulhawa, it's really great to chat with you again. We haven't seen each other in a while, so it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Thanks for sending me a copy of your new book, Against the Loveless World. I picked it up. I was not able to put it down other than to, sleep and eat. And even that was some difficulty. I really couldn't put it down. I read it. I'm a very slow reader, and I read it very, very quickly.
Thanks, Miko. I think that's every writer wants to hear that.
Yeah, seriously, I'm not saying it because you're my friend. And it's moving because you managed to put in so much into the book. I mean, you managed to put in Palestine, you managed to put in so many different issues that are relevant to so many different people. And you tied it all in to Palestine, which of course you care deeply about, as do I. So I thought maybe just to start off, maybe you can just tell me about the book. Tell me how it started, what your thoughts were, where it came from, just whatever you want people to know about this book, about this creation.
I mean, just a broad overview. It's a little bit different from my previous two books, even though it is somewhat intergenerational, but it's principally the story of one woman, and she is a Palestinian woman who was born in Kuwait. She has multiple names. Her mother named her Nahr after the Nahr al-Urdun, or the Jordan River, to keep a promise that she made to the Jordan River when she was forced to cross it on foot following Israel's invasion of what remained of Palestine in 1967. And but her father recorded the name Yaqut on her birth certificate, which was kind of a drunken nod to his mistress at the time. Her younger brother, Jihad, nicknamed her Nanu when he was little. And she took the name Almas in her 20s when which she used at late night parties with powerful men who paid her to dance and other things. So the story spans, the late 60s into through the first Gulf War, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and then the U.S. invasion of Iraq. The flood of refugees, of Palestinian refugees from Kuwait into Jordan. And then then she goes to Palestine, where her destiny really unfolds in a very dramatic way, and in a highly fictionalized way as well, in a type of resistance that hasn't happened yet in Palestine.
And how did this start? How did her story start in your mind? Where did it come from?
So, all of my stories just kind of start with a couple of seeds. I don't really ever know what the story is going to be, or where it's going to go, or who the supporting characters are going to be. But the seeds that I started with in this novel were, number one, that it would begin in Kuwait, that it would encompass Palestinians who found refuge in Kuwait and made that their home. And I also knew that it would encompass sex work to some extent, which is rampant, and especially in Gulf nations where men pay a lot of money for sex. And also the other seed was that it would encompass a kind of unconventional type of resistance in Palestine. So those are the three things that I started with in the story. I didn't have any of the other characters, just Nahed and these three little vague kind of outlines.
And you managed to create a story that's also at the same time universal and very Palestinian, because the issues that Nahed faces throughout her entire life as a woman are universal. The cruelty of men, the whole sex trafficking and sex trade issue, and her own life really in society. There's so many places where she could have been and would have had the same life because she's a woman. And at the same time, it's also very Palestinian. And another thing that really struck me is how these characters are all very full characters, and they kind of weave in and out of each other and in the whole story of Palestine seamlessly, which I thought was really, really brilliant. So the one line I mentioned to you when we talked that really struck me, and it's there right in the beginning, where Nahed says, "I don't care to be accommodating." I found that to be very meaningful. Maybe, I don't know if you meant for what you had in mind when you thought about that, or when you made her say that, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, why is it meaningful to you? I'm just curious. Like, what did it mean?
Because being unaccommodating is crucial when I think you are an oppressed minority, when you're struggling for your rights, when you're a woman. I mean, being unaccommodating carries a lot. It's a huge statement to make, and I think it goes through a thread. Her unwillingness to be accommodating,
right,
runs through the entire story. And she pays a heavy price for it. It's not easy. It's not like it comes easy for her. And I think it's part of the larger issue of like I said, women, but also oppressed people, whether you accommodate the oppressor and the occupier or you resist, and there's a conflict there.
Yeah.
You know, we see this in Palestine all the time.
And
You and I talk
also,
about it.
yeah.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts were when you made her say that.
Yeah. I mean, it was very astute of you to kind of hone in on that statement, because it was meant to be meaningful. So on a very superficial level, that she makes that statement in reference to not speaking English. So she's in this prison cell, and she gets visitors who start to speak to her in English. And she was saying, I can speak English, but I don't really care to be accommodating. She doesn't care to try and meet them, make them comfortable. As far as she's concerned, she's an Arab woman. They can either speak to her in Arabic or they can bring her an interpreter or something. It's not her problem. I think, as women, first of all, there's that layer. We are, especially women of my generation, have always been taught to be small, to accommodate, to sacrifice, to cater to other people's whims, especially the whims of men, and to be careful not to damage their egos and whatnot. I mean, these were there's a whole system of accommodation that women of my generation, and I certainly have had to spend a lifetime unlearning. And you're right, that also translates to oppressed societies, especially in situations where people are basically powerless to shape their destiny and to have any control over their lives. And so accommodation becomes a survival mechanism. And some people choose not to accommodate, and many of them pay the ultimate price for that and are killed. So Nahed, it's not that she's never accommodating, because there are times in her life where she has to be, because her life depends on it, right? And there's actually another line in there where she says, we're taught to cater to the whims of men, and then she says ... until we get even, and she does, and she holds a grudge like no one else, and when it comes to Palestinians, I think there are segments of our society who for whom accommodation is just second nature. And we are I shouldn't say we, because I again, that was one of the things that I've spent a lifetime unlearning, is that we are called to accommodate, especially the sensitivities and the sensibilities of Jewish people all over the world, right? We are constantly being told, well, you have to understand, because they endured a Holocaust. And but the reverse, of course, is never asked of Israelis. Well, you have to understand, you've just taken their entire lives, everything that they've ever known. You've stolen everything from them, right? The reverse is never asked of Israelis. And so on a human level, of course, one can understand that, but I'm not interested in accommodating and sort of, letting other people's sort of paranoia or insecurities or sensitivities or history or whatever it might be, that doesn't trump my safety or my freedom, my liberty. And that's how Nahed feels as well. She from a very young age, even though she was just kind of a very simple girl with very simple and unassuming ambitions. She was never anybody. I mean, she always, even as a little girl, she had like her little girl gangs, and so she never bought into that. Women are to do what women are to do in terms of accommodating and sacrifice and whatnot. But she never had a name for it, and she never had words for it. She didn't have a language for this sort of innate rebellion she had inside of her. So, and I kind of like to label that as, she was a feminist without really ever knowing the word feminism. And so was Burak, and we've all known women like that from indigenous societies like Palestinians and everywhere else, where you have this sort of inherent dignity and of being a woman, and you're not interested in subverting your own dignity to accommodate someone else's ego or someone else's sensitivity or insecurity and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that translates on every level.
Yeah, I'm amazed how many times I hear Palestinians who explain to me that they need to be more accommodating and they need to understand more, and they really think that if Palestinians understood the Holocaust better and so on, that that's really the key. The burden is on them to understand. And I have a friend, a great activist here in DC, Tahir Zalla, and we were at this, he was actually speaking on a panel about 6 months ago, very controversial event in one of the suburbs here in DC. The place was packed with these older Jewish, kind of very liberal Zionist types. It was a real controversial event. They almost canceled it, whatever. Anyway, he was on the panel with this other liberal Zionist, somebody from J Street. And at the end, things got heated up, and these very obvious kind of local Jews, very wealthy, it's a very nice community, suburb. He stood up and he said, so, do we not deserve a place where we can be safe? And the guy's lived his whole life in Washington, D.C. He's very wealthy. He lives in a beautiful place. You know what I mean? The absurdity of what he was saying didn't even occur to him, that he needs another safe place somewhere else.
Yeah, just in case.
And which is, I was like, I couldn't believe these words were coming out of his mouth, sitting where we were in this beautiful suburb, right? And Tahir looked at him and he said, I got 4 words: not at my expense. And that was it. Talk about being unaccommodating. You know what I mean? That's exactly the line.
I respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the line. Whereas on the other hand, you have all these people that say, no, they need to understand better. We, the Palestinians, need to understand the Jews better, and so on. So anyway, like I said, I thought that was a really, really powerful moment where she says that, and it really set the stage. Another thing that I thought was powerful was the use of the Arabic language, because you're not compromising. You're using a lot of Arabic. I mean, obviously the book's in English, but you're using a lot of Arabic for names of events, for names of things, for names of places, food, and so on. And you say it the way it's said. You write it like Muhammad. You don't write Muhammad, it's Muhammad, which is the way people call each other. And I thought this moment where, and also tying into the fact that she's not accommodating about the language in her cell. So she's inside a cell, inside a prison, inside the state of Israel, which are 3 structures that were created artificially in Palestine, really in order to imprison Palestinians at different levels. Mm-hmm. The state of Israel is also a form of prison for Palestinians, with all of its racist laws and the different definitions of Palestinians and so forth. Then you've got the Palestinians in the jail, and then she is in this little cell. And she brings into this very Israeli Zionist environment the Arabic language, which is really the language of the entire world on the outside. Even that's really the language of Palestine, So she kind of brings it, even though she's in this layer after layer after layer of a prison, an artificial Israeli prison that was imposed on Palestine. She insists on bringing all of that that's on the outside into Kuwait and Jordan and Palestine itself into that space, which is, I think, also incredibly powerful.
I mean, I can respond to that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, the issue with the Arabic words being in Arabic is, I mean, that's something I do in all of my novels. I maintain some of the Arabic words that just I don't feel like should be translated. They're just so beautiful in their natural form, Like, for example, I would never think to translate inshallah to God willing. Inshallah is inshallah, khalas, it's, what I mean? So, and there's other such words that I think are just so beautiful in their natural form, and they should just stay that way. And I put a glossary to make it easier for for people who aren't familiar with the language, just to have a reference. But that said, I actually don't feel that wasn't something I did to kind of indigenize a colonizer space or something like that, because because Hebrew, yes, Arabic is the predominant language of the region, but Hebrew is indigenous to Palestine. The language, I mean, maybe not the Israeli kind of Hebrew. I don't think that's what was spoken before. My understanding is that's a little bit of kind of bastardized from the original Hebrew, but the Palestinian Jews and Iraqi Jews and Persian Jews always prayed in biblical Hebrew languages, and they had that language there before Israel sort of came and just created this whole Zionist infrastructure around the language and in the country and whatnot. So, which is one reason that, even though I have refused to publish my books in Israel, it isn't because I've refused for them to be translated into Hebrew. Quite the contrary. I mean, I would be happy for them to be translated into Hebrew, but I'm not doing business with an Israeli company.
Right.
So it's not, I don't, languages are portals, and they're beautiful. And I don't really have an issue personally with Hebrew,
Yeah, no, I know.
Even being a major language in Palestine, I think it should be. It's the more languages people know in life, the better. Sure. But so
yeah. I wasn't suggesting that's what you did. I just thought she brought the outside into the cell using the language. Let's talk a little bit about literature and about resistance through literature. I think it is in clearly your literature is resistance, is a form of resistance. I see, and at least that's how I see it. Ghassan Kanafani, I think it's fair to say as well, even though his literature is wonderful and lives on its own, clearly, but there is an element of resistance when we're talking about Palestine. What do you think about that? Do you think literature is a form of resistance?
So it can be, yeah. And I think when Palestinians, no matter what we do, whatever art we produce, regardless of whether it is overtly relative to resistance activities or not, becomes an act of resistance simply because our entire existence is negated. So anything that sort of, places us as a people in history and in the world is an act of resistance. However, I don't write. I mean, I don't tell these stories starting out that this is that I'm writing resistance. That I'm writing the literary resistance. And it's not that I think there's anything wrong with that, not at all. But I do think that storytelling, at least for me, really has to begin and end and take the entire journey with the characters, period. And I think for me, for my stories to work and to come alive for me, that's the only loyalty that I can have in the process of writing, and that is loyalty to the characters, to their truth, to their lives, their inner worlds, their outer worlds, to the terrain and the topography and the historic audit. I can't ever really write with a loyalty to readers, to a particular school of thought, to my publisher, to the money, to anything. Like I just, it doesn't work for me to have any of those motivations in my head. It's really it's character. It's driven by the lives of the characters. Like I at some point in the process, I fall in love with them, or I hate them, or something happens where they're real. They're very real to me, and they kind of begin to write their own stories.
I wanna get your take on a quote, okay? Talking about whether it's resistance or not resistance, but actually two quotes, but I'll start with this one. The first one is, you talk about the epic fabrication of a Jewish nation returning to its homeland, and how it has grown into a living, breathing narrative that shaped lives as if it were truth.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of this, like the whole sort of fairy tale surrounding the creation of Israel is such an extraordinary lie and myth that.
But an epic fabrication.
It is. It really is. I mean, the whole world bought it wholesale, and even Israelis. It's not like the population's trying to hoodwink everybody. I mean, there's a small group of Israelis who are, but the Israeli population believes it. This, that Jews of the world for millennia have been yearning to go and live in Palestine, to return to return. That's where they're all from and whatnot. I mean, there's, first of all, not only is there zero forensic evidence that Jewish people from Poland, for example, ever set foot in Palestine prior to Zionism. Also, this idea that Jews could never go to Palestine until Israel was created is also a lie, because for the 1200 years under Muslim rule, Jews were free to go. I mean, that's how a lot of Zionists went there, right? Like Ben Gurion was able to go and get a wonderful education in Ottoman Palestine and live there because it was open. It was really, Muslims especially opened the region to Jews.
Actually, the reason Jews didn't go is because of the Jewish prohibition. Jewish law prohibits the return of Jews. That's a big reason why Jews stayed where they were. I mean, they were doing fine also where they were, but Jewish law prohibits that return as well. So, and those days,
but it's not. First of all, it's not that's part of the fabrication of return.
Yeah,
but regardless of what the reasons were, I'm just saying anybody, they were free to go and live there before if they wanted. It's just that nobody wanted. And also this idea that Jews of the world were a singular nation is also a fabrication, because prior to Zionism, no European Jew ever looked at an Arab Jew and thought, oh, that's my brethren or my sistren. They were Europeans, complete with European racism and white supremacist ideals, and who looked at people east of them with disdain and with a sense of superiority, which is, that's a whole nother conversation. But
yeah, I know, but I thought that was a pretty powerful line right there, where you say that you don't see that sort of stuff in fiction, in novels, and I think it's great that it's there because it's just so natural. You know what I mean? You say it as though it's like no big deal. It's not a big deal to say it, because look at it. I mean, here's what it is. There's another quote which is of a different, a completely different style. It's a completely different thing, where you talk about you're looking at Bilal, I mean, she's looking at Bilal, and she says she sees the guilt, the impotence of seeing those settlements, the anguish over his brother, his mother, the years in prison, the torture, the inability to move. And she's watching him, and she's seeing that. It's not a conversation. She's seeing that in him as she's looking at him. Can you talk about that?
So this is, for people who haven't read it, this is, Bilal is the man that she's fallen in love with. And he, he's kind of imprisoned in his own home. He has been in and out of Israeli prisons. But even after he's released, he's still, he's not allowed to practice his profession. And as happens with a lot of Palestinians, they really can't, move beyond a small radius surrounding where they live, and they're forced to contend with all manner of restrictions. Why
the guilt? You started by saying the guilt. It starts with guilt. The guilt, the impotence of seeing the settlements, and so on. Why the guilt?
So again, she's referring to Bilal, who's a fighter. I mean, and I think that readers should really kind of, it makes more sense when you get to know Bilal and who he is. They both feel guilt for different reasons. In the same way that we feel guilt, I feel guilt here living in relative safety and relative privilege, and relative liberty. She has her own measure of guilt as well, and so does Bilal. I mean, he's a fighter. He's failed on some fronts. He's impotent, and he also does some things too that he's ashamed of, that aren't entirely consistent with his role as a fighter as well. So they're complicated. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to politics a little bit, to BDS, to the cultural and academic boycott, which is something I know you're involved with, and you and I discussed several times. And in a way, I think it's similar to the accommodating thing we discussed earlier, where people, even Palestinians, will say, yes, but the academic boycott, the cultural boycott, that's going too far, because the academics and the artists, these are the people we can connect with. These are areas where people can come together, and so on. So are they wrong, or talk about that?
Well, you know how I feel about that.
I feel that way too, but I want to hear you say it.
Yeah, this idea that art is somehow separate from socio-political realities is the epitome of privilege and sort of privileged liberalism that I mean, indigenous societies, occupied people, oppressed people, write from a collective wound, as well as individual experiences, and that reflect our realities. And for people outside of that context of personal and of the collective destruction and the collective anguish and collective wound, don't have the visceral sort of knowledge of that. They don't get it. They don't get that. They don't get what it is to come from this sort of intergenerational ongoing trauma, and for and when you create your, art from that, and for them to come and say, well, that's separate, and you can't, don't mix politics with art, or don't mix sort of a collective experience or a collective social issue with art, as if those things can be separated. Like, they're just, they're inseparable. My writing cannot be separated from me as a Palestinian. It's almost like separating the woman from a mother or something. They're so wound up in each other, and so dependent and intertwined, that there's no separation between them. And the idea that there can be really has to come from a place where, of a place of privilege, where you have no real sense of, of what it means to come from that kind of context.
So how do you see the boycott, the academic and the cultural boycott, since you're talking about art? How do you see that happen? What is your interpretation of that?
I mean, I think it's vital. It's important to every. So,
what is it? What is the boycott? How does the boycott of that happen?
So, so cultural boycott is basically, and I touched on this earlier when I said that I won't have my books published in Israel because I'm not doing business with Israel. And it means that, as artists, as writers, as musicians, you don't lend your name, your labor, your art to whitewash or to normalize a very violent, abnormal, oppressive colonial situation. So,
what do you mean by normalize?
Normalizing means to make normal, right? To make it okay. So if I'm a performer and I agree to go hold a concert in Israel, for example, and even though the indigenous people who live in virtual prisons have called on performers around the world not to lend their name to legitimize this oppression, and I go in defiance of that call to boycott, I am normalizing the situation. I am lending my name to a system of apartheid simply by performing, because I'm basically saying there's nothing wrong with this. It's okay for me to go and perform for the people who are allowed to come and listen to me, even though other people who might want to hear my songs are not allowed to cross checkpoints and whatnot because they're not the right religion or whatnot. That's what we mean by normalization. Precedent. The biggest precedent was the boycott against apartheid South Africa, and the most famous instance of that was the song "I Won't Play in Sun City," and artists around the world refused to entertain in South Africa. They refused to lend their name, their art, their labor to an oppressive system. They refused to normalize that oppressive system. They refused to accommodate apartheid. And so that's what Palestinians are asking for. And that's what I mean by normalization.
What about the academic boycott?
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same concept, whether it's art or academic cooperation. Most Israeli academic institutions are involved. I mean, Israel is a military state, and there's really no aspect of Israeli society that is not complicit in the military, in this military apparatus, in the occupation apparatus, in the colonization apparatus, and their universities are at the top of that list, actually, in lending their research and in accepting funds and in ongoing and persistent cooperation with the military and with the occupation and with settlement building and whatnot. So again, academic boycott means not normalizing those things, not pretending that Israeli academic institutions are not complicit, not pretending that a university in an illegal settlement like Ariel is a normal university, because it's not. So that's why the academic boycott, and also because their academic institutions are frankly not open to most people, and they're not open to even many of their Arab citizens, and they're not open to, certainly not open to Palestinians, and they're not even open to Palestinian citizens of other countries because of their heritage, their Palestinian heritage.
Right, and you don't have to go all the way to Ariel. I mean, Tel Aviv University sits, I think, on 4 or 5 Palestinian villages.
Yep, absolutely.
And
Also,
the same goes for Haifa and the others.
Yeah. Actually, people always talk about, one of the Zionist narratives is that, that they're sort of restoring the kingdom of Judea and David and whatnot. But there was never an instance in history when ancient Hebrews actually controlled any part of the coastal region. So, the political control of ancient Hebrews was inland from the coast. The coast was always part of Phoenician and Philistine heritage, right? So just a little bit of.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to, if we're talking about books, I'll plug in another book, Nur Masalha's book, Palestine: A 4,000-Year History.
Yes, I love that. Really
the last year, the year before, excellent book about clearly showing how the name Palestine has been used to describe that piece of land going back 4,000 years, and he touches on all of that. So, so that's of course it's great history, and it's just very, very, very clearly, very simply states the case without falling back on the biblical narrative, which of course is not historic or in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So and I think just going back to the cultural and academic boycott, my question is always, well, if these academics are so open-minded and progressive, where are they? In other words, if the university sits on destroyed Palestinian towns, why aren't they demanding reparations to the people whose homes these used to be? Why are they not in the streets demanding? Israelis are not but the thousands protesting in Jerusalem in front of the prime minister's office to get Netanyahu out.
Right.
Why aren't they protesting to give water and medicine at the very least, and cancel the siege on Gaza?
Well, here's the thing.
These are all academic. These are, where are they? Why aren't they protesting? Why aren't they standing up? So if they stood up for all of these things, then you could say, well, then maybe there's no argument, but they're not even there. They're all completely complicit with the Zionist narrative, with the Zionist myth, with the Zionist.
I wouldn't even use the words, give water, give anything. I mean, it's not Israel's to give in the first place.
Give, to allow, to provide, to whatever. You know what I mean?
It's their, they can return it. They can,
Yeah. But I mean, they're not there standing up for these issues anyway. Can you talk a little bit more about what the Palestinian the boycott does, PACB, and the work that they do, any campaigns? Because people always want to join. People always know. Do you have any insight, any more insight about that? Because it's a crucial issue, and it's one that I know I come across a lot with people, and I have to argue this case over and over again. Can you talk a little bit more about what the academic and cultural boycott is doing, actually? Are you comfortable
So,
talking about stuff?
I think the best thing is to just visit the website, USACB, and PACB. I'm a member of USACB, and they actually have webinars regularly, so people can go there.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we covered everything that that I thought of. Is there anything that you want to add in regards to the book, to the story, to anything? I think it's like I said, I couldn't put it down. I read it. I'm a very slow reader, and I think I read it in like 3 days, or something like that. It touches on universal issues. It touches on Palestine.
So I do want to say, I mean, one of the traps that I always fall into, and I think even interviewers always sort of do this with Palestinian writers, is that there ends up being this concentration on the political. Like our entire discussion was really about the politics, but in fact, I mean, it's a very human story, and
I said it was very universal. It didn't have to be Palestinian. Go ahead.
There's a human drama, right? But there is this sort of focus on politics when it comes to Palestinians, in a way that that isn't present with with fiction from white people, for example. And it's.
You think it takes away from something? I think it elevates.
The characters end up, their lives, the story gets lost. I mean, it does. I mean, the story does get lost. And there is, I mean, like there's these amazing characters that I kind of fell in love with, like Burak is a badass, but she's also tortured. Muhammad, Bilal, the friends, they all have their individual dramas that are nestled in this sort of political milieu for sure. But I mean, I think that the personal dramas are just as compelling, or at least I hope they are. They were for me. And so I mean, I don't want it to seem like this book is sort of a political rant or anything like that. I hope it's not. I mean,
I agree. There's no question the characters are all part of something bigger. So to me, it makes it more interesting. It's like if you read, I told you I just read Ibrahim Nasrallah's the Lanterns of the King of Galilee. It's a beautiful historical novel, right? But the fact that it's talking about a king that lived in Palestine and ruled almost all of Palestine, that adds something tremendous to the story, I think, to the fact that it is about Palestine and there is this connection to something greater, which is political and social and so forth. So to me, that's not taking away at all from
but I mean,
the literary qualities of the book at all.
I love that novel, but its power is in what he did with the characters and the story, and the individuals. I mean, anybody can write about the King of Galilee, right? Anybody can, and you can write a nonfiction book about that. But what made that book so powerful and so memorable were the characters and their lives and their personal dramas, and how they navigated their world with their own personal baggage, and their insecurities and their passions and their secrets, and so I mean, I think that
you don't want to be pegged as a Palestine resistance type of a thing. You want it to be to have the full spectrum of work of literature, which I believe it is. I believe it does. It stands alone on its own with that as well. I don't think it's going to be pegged. I don't think it should be pegged either. Go on. You were saying something.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's. I think it's just something that I think all Palestinian writers sort of contend with this, and it isn't just Palestinian writers. I think most writers of color in general sort of end up being kind of have to be representative of, you know, of so much that, and sometimes you just kind of want your story to stand on its literary merits. Yeah.
I don't think you have anything to worry. I don't think you have anything to worry. I don't think any of your mornings are, you know.
It wasn't worry, you know. I some people love it, some people hate it, and that's the, you know, that's the way it goes. But yeah, I mean, her, and you know, either love her or hate her or whatever. And I mean, I think a book, novels in particular, really kind of don't ever really become until they're read, and that's where their potential is expressed. It's not really, a book isn't done really until it's interpreted by readers. Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have. I think that in this book you offer a lot, and I think it'd be foolish for people not to accept your offer and get the book and read it and enjoy it, because there's a lot in it. And we'll have the links to get the book and everything right here as we talk, so people will be coming up soon, right? But people can pre-order already.
August the 25th, it'll be out.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So anyway, Susan Abulhawa, thank you so much. The book is terrific. Best of luck with it.
Thanks for having me on.
And I'll see you soon. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, that is going to do it. Thank you for keeping up with the Miko Peled podcast. Please rate and review the Miko Peled podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, whatever podcast app you use. If you haven't already, it really helps out with the ranking and getting new folks into the podcast feed. If you have any questions for Miko, you can shoot those over to me at booking@mikopeled.com, and we can try to get those answered on forthcoming episodes. Maybe start working on a second Q&A podcast episode. And lastly, head on over to mikopeled.com to pick up a copy of Miko's books. And please do yourself a favor and pick up Susan Abulhawa's new masterpiece, Against the Loveless World. Once again, I've included links in the description for an Amazon and a non-Amazon ordering option. All right, until next time, take care.